I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. And yet I ask you, is not an alien force already among us?
From the gates of Mount Rome to the far corners of the endless highway, wherever you are, welcome to the show.
So you believe in some kind of Armageddon?
Yeah, most definitely. We in the last times and days right now. The Illuminati's in effect.
Welcome back to the show. My guest today is a researcher and podcaster, and boy, does she pull in some really great guests. Her show is Stygian Charters podcast. So, Nix, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, I'm happy to have you. And you were in the middle of telling me a story. Can you jump back into that? Because I was really liking that.
Yeah, sure. So, I was telling you the first time I heard you was on Heidi Love's podcast, Unfiltered Rise, great show. And that's when I started following your show. But you had done a presentation and covered the Nazis and the occult. And something that, it's something that I find really fascinating too. And it's kind of interesting because what I was telling you was my grandfather became an orphan at the age of, it was, I think, 13 or 14. His parents died a couple of years apart. They were older. But my grandpa was born in 1927, so before World War II. And when his parents died, his family came and cleaned out the house and took everything, but they didn't want anything to do with him. His family is wealthy. They just wanted the belongings and anything of value. And when they were there, he found a black book underneath their bed, and he doesn't know what it was, but they took it from him and said it was something to the effect of that it was the devil's book. And then the other item he found, and I believe my mom said he found it in a floorboard or something, it was my great grandmother's locket, and it was before she married my great grandfather because it had her maiden name initials on it. And then inside the locket was a picture of her and my grandfather. And on the back side, this is where it's very interesting, was a swastika. And it was in black diamonds or some type of black jewels. And it was, again, this was before World War II, and the swastika sat flush. So not like the Nazis who slightly rotated counterclockwise. And again, it predated World War II and when the Nazis started using it. So, but this would have been during the height of the spiritual movement. And we knew a little bit about, my family knew a little bit about swastika, but until I started researching the occult, we didn't know anything about it. So, but we just chalked it up before I was the researcher I am now that, we did know, it was a symbol used in many different cultures, Hinduism, Navajos, everything like that. We just chalked it up to being a symbol of good luck since it was predated World War II. But through my research and talking to some other researchers, some who are occultists themselves, they were likely theosophists. So followers of Madame Blavatsky.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's interesting you say that too, because I'm working on a side project to do with that right now with her and with theosophy. I haven't gotten to the swastika part yet, and maybe I'll have to dig a little bit more for that, but I know it's there. When I was studying the Nazis, I kept coming across that symbol, of course, right? And it's hard to find the actual origin for that symbol. It goes back so far.
Ancient.
it's ancient, and it's like you said, like many different cultures were using it, and it's almost as if they were using it. It meant something different to different people,
Mm-hmm.
but it
Right.
goes way back.
And it's so interesting too that different cultures were using it, because these were completely different continents.
Yes,
So,
yes,
using this symbol, this isn't like, your traditional geometric symbol, like a square or a circle or something like that. It's unique. I also
yeah.
found it interesting how the Nazis, they did rotate it slightly counterclockwise, which is almost, if you think about in occult magic or whatever, going counterclockwise is widdershins, which is kind of a negative connotation,
Mm.
going against nature and everything like that. So I found that interesting, but wasn't surprised that the Nazis did this.
Yes. From what I could tell, Hitler himself brought that symbol in, and Hitler himself was brought in that red, that bold red and black. Like the
Mm-hmm.
color scheme was all his idea. But when you look at where he was at as a person when he came up with that symbol, he was very into this occult magazine that was
Mm-hmm.
based out of Berlin, perhaps. Maybe it was somewhere in Austria, somewhere in Germany. I should
Mm-hmm.
just say that. But that magazine was covering a lot of these older ancient cultures. So I
Right.
think something he read possibly clued him in to use that.
Yeah, for sure.
And
And
this
it's
was in a time of theosophy,
yes,
you
that's what I was
know.
going to say. Yeah.
Hmm.
So, because I mean, even in Theosophy, I think they talk about Aryans,
Yes.
and everything. So that it seems like that would have been something that he would have identified with in his ideology.
Yeah. Yeah. And the Aryan part about this is very odd because, well, the Nazis came along and they gave us this version of Aryan that now
Mm-hmm.
everyone kind of associates with Nazism. But we it goes back to this older culture to do with people living in the North, people living in
Mm-hmm. Right.
a civilization that either sunk or was destroyed, very Atlantean in that regard. But those people, some of those people survived and they migrated to Europe, and some of them went to Iran and Iraq as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just a white person thing, I guess is the best.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's
Right.
not the best way to say it, but that's the way I'm saying it. So,
Yeah.
but you see it
Right.
in
Yeah.
India as well. Like these,
Yeah.
I don't know. There is a big portion of Aryan people who were in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
That
Yeah.
part I think gets missed a lot.
And I feel like, and even though they, researchers and of experts out there in World War II, Nazis, the occult aspect of it and everything, and chalk it up to a lot of it to be conspiracy. But when you look at the book, The Real Society was based off of, that kind of touches on that Aryan race as
Hmm.
well.
What was that guy's name who wrote that book? Do you remember?
I can't think of it for the
I can't
life of
remember.
me.
It'll
I
come to me
have it in my
later.
notes in a notebook
Yeah.
somewhere, but
Um,
yeah.
yeah, that book is interesting. I think that had a lot of influence on Blavatsky as well. But with when I don't know if you're comfortable saying this, but were your grandparents, where were they at in the States? Were they in a area where theosophy
So
was being studied?
I believe at the time they were in, I don't, it might have been West Virginia, but I
Hmm.
don't know where. I know
Okay.
that they were in the coal business and did very well in the coal business. So they were a wealthy family. So, but that's the extent that I know. And my grandpa didn't have a lot to go off of either. So,
Hmm.
but he wouldn't talk about whatever this black book
Yeah.
was. So
Okay. Yeah, that's so interesting. Wow.
yeah.
That is
Someone
so
says, "Do you have the
interesting.
book?" I'm like, "No, I wish I did, because then I'd had like no."
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Then you'd have more clues to this. Well,
Hmm.
that stuff started from what I understand, a lot of the spiritualist movement started in New York
Hmm.
and moved down. I probably moved down through Appalachia as well.
Yeah, that would make sense then.
Yeah,
That would
yeah.
make sense.
I noticed I wanted to ask you this before we
Mhm.
jump
Yeah.
into things. What made you reach out to Greenfield? Because I've read some of his books.
So, Greenfield, I've heard him interviewed on many other podcasts, and I always was so fascinated with what he had to say, and also he was a very entertaining guest as well. I also watched oh god, Hellier. I don't know, did
Yes.
you watch Hellier at all?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so yeah, I watched that, and so I actually had the opportunity to be on a different show, Subconscious Realms, because he knew I was interested in Greenfield, and so I got to start talking to Greenfield that way. And so I asked Greenfield about the locket, and he was really fascinated with it. And he said, he definitely believed it was my great grandparents were Theosophists, but there is a small chance they could have been Hermetic Brotherhood of Light too. So
Interesting.
yes. So yeah. His involvement in Hellier and the what is it? The UFO knots, what it was, the book,
Secret Cipher.
Yeah, Secret Cipher. I found
UFO
that
knots.
interesting and stuff like that. So yeah, so there was some
well, he knows his
things
stuff. I
Yeah.
mean, he knows his stuff, and I'd be interested to see if, and I don't know if there's any way of tracing this or not, but going back and looking to see if they had, interactions with people in any of these orders.
Mhm.
And
Right.
were some of these orders, like, did they have any headquarters or whatnot in West Virginia? West
Mhm.
Virginia is a very, very weird place. I grew up driving through that state because I had family in Pennsylvania, and I was in
Mhm.
North Carolina, so we were always going through West Virginia.
Mhm.
Beautiful, beautiful
Yeah.
state, but like super weird as
Mhm.
well.
Yeah.
In a
You get
cool
to
way,
Yeah.
actually.
You get those deliverance vibes, occasionally while you're driving through.
Yeah, this guy
Oh,
right here.
oh,
That's one of those West Virginia cryptids.
oh, yep. Which
The
one is that?
that is the Flatwoods Monster.
Okay, I've heard it. Yeah, I've heard of that one.
This was
Okay.
one of those crazy West Virginia stories.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd love to see the occult connections in West Virginia. That'd be a really cool deep
Yeah.
dive if they're there.
Yeah, for sure. No, definitely.
Yeah, no, yeah, Greenfield. I had to ask because his work is so interesting, and he's been a good reference point for me with
Mm-hmm.
some of the stuff I'm studying, which I'm not going to go into all that because
Yeah.
that'll sidetrack this. But maybe if it comes up, because, and maybe it will,
Mm-hmm.
when it comes to this show, the occult has just kind of come up on its own. Like, I don't know that there was ever a definitive moment where I decided to look into it.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
I know you've done extensive research into the occult, so I'd love to
Yeah.
get into that.
Yeah. So, well, as a child, like I used to, be afraid of just about anything. Like I remember keeping parents up overnight, like an Unsolved Mysteries episode I watched that freaked me out. I can't remember which one.
Hmm.
When a friend told me about the Aztecs and stuff. But anyways, I was always scared of that stuff. But as I got older, I think it was like middle school, I got really interested into the paranormal. And then it was UFOs, and then it was serial killers and true crime. I was a criminal justice major in college. And then eventually it became, conspiracies and the occult. And I feel like the occult like ties into all of those things that I was interested in previously. And so that was the next rabbit hole I went down. And there's just a lot of fascinating topics. And it's one of those things, it's a mystery still. They call the occult means hidden, right? So
Right.
and there's the secret societies and just the quest for knowledge, and all of that. So that's how I kind of fell into the occult and my interest there, which led to so I grew up during the height of the satanic panic.
Hmm.
And eventually, they came out and they were just like, oh, it's a hoax, that's nothing. It was nothing. It was just a bunch of people panicking, especially like in the Bible Belt and this and that. But I know people who, even police officers, that said, yeah, there was something to that. People were doing weird shit. So, and even my dad at the time, he would off-road in his Jeep, and he came across a site that, they were sacrificing animals or something, not humans, but definitely animals. So there was things going on, and there's been evidence of such things. And I might not get into a lot of it today, but that I touch on the Landing report, which was a report by an FBI agent during the Satanic, or around maybe even a little bit after the Satanic Panic, and he said he really found no evidence that suggested of ritualistic abuse of children, which there's things that have come out that clearly show evidence of this, even though a lot of times that evidence is dismissed or downplayed. And there's even a lot of cases, like in a later episode, I'll get into the Chicago Ripper crew, who clearly identified as Satanists, and they raped and murdered women, did ritualistic things during these horrific crimes.
There's another layer to these all these major cases that you would file under Satanic Panic. If you really look into them, and I mean look beyond the headlines and spend a little bit of time with the case, there's another layer back there that makes you go, maybe that something actually did happen here.
Right. And so it blows my mind that it's swept under the rug like it is. And from what I found in my research, when some of these crimes happen, they don't really focus on that angle. And I think it's more of, they don't want to, legal professionals, they want to stick with like the strong and important evidence and facts of the case, the ones that would lead to a conviction. Introducing religion with such controversial beliefs, along with having to delve into the topic of what freedom of religion consists of, that can muddy the waters. And cause moral ambiguity. Objectivity could be lost among the jurors, and these kind of details are often not publicized. So think Dave McGowan's Program to Kill, all his research that he has found in some of these crimes that wasn't reported on. And I think that a lot of times they talk about, like, they don't want to bring up the occult angle or the satanic angle in these crimes. And I think that's kind of why they do that.
Well, they did that with the Nazis too, at Nuremberg. They left all the weird occult stuff out.
Yep.
Ultimately, I wasn't able to conclusively find out why they did that, but at the end of the day, it may have just been too weird, or they felt like the people in charge felt like this is too weird to discuss on the world stage or in a public forum.
Right. Well, if you think about it, I think one angle of it could be too, like, that was something when Project Paperclip happened. FBI or CIA probably wanted to explore some of those occult topics in the terms like MK Ultra, and then there was MK Often, where they were speaking to psychics, palm readers, seances, like all kinds of weird stuff, astral projection, those kind of things called? That they MK Often. It was it's really hard to find stuff on it, and it was a offshoot of, I think it was MK Search, which is an offshoot of the MK Ultra. But yeah, they were exploring occult and paranormal angles.
Cool.
So, but yeah. So
yeah, well, I know that stuff happens. So
yeah, Sidney Gottlieb was in charge of it, I believe.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, maybe it goes into remote viewing some.
Yes, it does. Yeah, that is another angle that goes into too. So, but that could be another reason. It seems like, the cult, like I said, is tied into all kinds of weird things. And I think they were exploring it to see if it could be weaponized.
I agree. I think that's what the Nazis were doing too.
Yep. So my presentation today, or what I'm going to be talking about today, it would be a multiple episode just because it's so long and extensive. But going back to the Satanic Panic, like I couldn't understand why it was being discounted when clearly there was, evidence out there that there was, and even there's, law enforcement officials today that still will tell you that weird stuff was going on or is going on. So I decided, and the other part of it was, I can't stand when when you bring up Satanists or talking, oh, Satanists, they're just atheists. You do know there's more than one kind of Satanism, right? Like there's, the theistic, who actually believe in Satan, and the non-theistic, which, I'll get into, which is like the Church of Satan and the Satanic Temple. So, but that drove me crazy too.
Yeah, me too.
Especially when you look at some of the crimes that have happened, they clearly, were viewing it from a theistic view and wanting to do these horrific crimes in a act for Satan. So
yeah. And
so,
even in some cases, even if it's not directly for Satan, there are other dark entities out there that witchcraft and other various forms of spiritual technology deal directly with. So it's like, even if they're not trying to talk to Satan or work with Satan, there's other dark entities as well.
Oh, for sure.
It's just a lot of layers to the cake.
Yeah, that would be almost like looking at the Goetia and the demons in the Goetia.
Yeah.
None of them are necessarily, Satan himself, but those would be entities I think you would classify as evil. So, and you would contact, for dark things. So for sure.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to touch on first was there's also some people don't know the difference between occult and occult. So I want to cover what both of them mean, just to, clarify things so everything can be understood a little bit more clearly. And I'm sure a lot of your audience already knows this, but in case we have any new listeners, I figured I'd touch on it. So although the exact definition of the occult and what constitute as occult practices vary, it typically encompasses esoteric, supernatural, mystical, or magical beliefs, practices, or phenomena. So, as I mentioned earlier, Latin translates to what is hidden. Authentic occult topics have traditionally been kept secretive and only available to a select few. The idea of keeping knowledge a secret was done because they held a belief that it was too dangerous and powerful in the hands of the uninitiated or unworthy. In modern popular usage, the term generally applies to subjects such as Satanism, dark magic, and demonic summoning. From an academic viewpoint, it often applies to subjects such as astrology, alchemy, Kabbalah, divination, scrying, contacting and summoning angels or demons, ritual magic, certain historical secret societies or mystery cults, hermeticism, magic runes, talismans, some forms of mysticism, and esoteric religious practices. So it covers quite a bit, and a lot of that people might not have considered, but a lot of New Age practices are called practices. And you see that listed in there, such as like astrology. But that covers what the occult is. Now we will move to occult. An occult is a group or movement held together by a shared commitment to charismatic leader or ideology. Cults are religious practices, but the cult is just a practice. In a cult, there can be occult practices. However, not all cults practice the occult. So a cult that practiced the occult, an example would be the Order of the Solar Temple that had the mass suicides. Well, we don't know if they were really suicides, but in Switzerland and Canada. So that would be a example of a cult or that practices the occult. An example of a cult that doesn't practice the occult would be maybe David Koresh in Waco, Texas. They could have, I mean, I'm not saying they couldn't, they didn't, but he was more into fitting the Bible into his agenda, like molding it to what he wanted. But so that is the difference between cults and a cult.
Yes.
So now we'll move on to the types of Satanism. So I had found a really good article, and it was called Exploring the Different Branches of Satanism by Catherine Beyer. I am not an expert on Satanism. I just research it. But she touches on, the more common type, as well as some of the more or less common. So some of these are really strange, but we'll talk about them as we go through. And the first one is reactive Satanism, and this is also known as adolescent Satanism. And I kind of call this like the teenage angst Satanism. But it refers to groups of individuals who adopt the stories of mainstream religion but invert its value. Thus, Satan is still evil as defined by Christianity, but one to be worshipped rather than shunned or feared. Think 1980s adolescents inverting Christianity with Gnostic elements inspired by black metal, Christian scare propaganda, role-playing games, and horror imagery, and engaging in petty crimes. So I think
I remember that Christian scare propaganda.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It was thick in the early 2000s, even late 90s too.
Yeah, especially toward a lot of the music industry.
Yes.
There's a lot, I mean, some of these bands did sing about dark things, but
Sure.
it's kind of similar to movies. Just because they're talking about it doesn't mean you should go like do it or whatever. But yeah, there's a lot of even during the Satanic Panic, like role-playing games, Dungeons and Dragons, like people thought that was satanic, and it really got a bad rep. And I can't remember, I probably should pull up like or put some notes on it or whatnot, but it seemed like it got a really bad rap when there was these college kids, and I don't remember where it was, and they did role playing or LARPing in these tunnels below the college, and the one kid ended up missing. They thought something bad happened because he was in a bad place. He was kind of suicidal. But they did end up finding him staying with a relative or something, and he did attempt to commit suicide and was unsuccessful, but later on he actually was successful. But there was a movie or short TV series, and I haven't seen it, and I do want to see it though, and it had Tom Hanks in it, and it's called Monsters and Mazes, and it's based loosely on this story, or the idea came from it.
Interesting.
So but yeah, so yeah, there was a lot of things back then, whether, it was music, role-playing games. And then you look at it, a lot of times teenagers are just looking to rebel. So that's kind of where this reactive Satanism comes in.
Sure.
And
The media was fueling it too. I'll just throw this in because I remember whenever Marilyn Manson would come to town to play, the media would have a field day with that. They would send all the reporters with cameras and film, and they'd hang out in front of the Coliseum, and they would make this big spectacle. They'd interview kids, and the kids are all decked out in goth. And of course, he just fueled that fire because, I don't know that he was a Satanist, but he hung out with LaVey and had all these pictures taken, and, he flirted with it. So that he's just one example. They did that with a lot of other pop culture icons.
There was even some crimes where bands were, blamed. I think there was one, there's some, I think they're like teenage boys, young adult boys, raped and murdered a girl, and Slayer got pulled into it, and everything. Judas Priest was another one. But when you mentioned Marilyn Manson, he also had a fascination with Nazis.
Yes, he
Funny
did.
enough.
And look, he's no saint. Like, he was putting sigils on his albums, like real sigils. He had real rituals behind some of the stuff he did. So I don't want to just say he flirted. I think he flirted with Satanism. I don't consider him to be a Satanist. Right. I think at some points he did say he was a Satanist, but he was one of those who said, but we don't believe in God. So it's one of those weird ones where it's like, you remember, I'm sure you'll get into this, but there's this whole, atheistic vibe to Satanists.
Right. Yep.
That I think a lot of that's just an illusion.
Oh, and I do touch on that too. Yeah, because there's certain things when you read or research or even just kind of watch or see how these satanic groups act, or they contradict themselves a lot of times. They say one thing and they say something else, and you're like, but how does that doesn't make sense with what you just said. So, but yes, I will get into that. Cool. But so reactive Satanism, teenage angst, kind of teenagers wanting to rebel. So next, I'm going to move into rationalistic Satanism, and that would be considered like the atheistic Satanism that we're talking about, or but it's the highly secularized and atheistic type of Satanism founded in the 1960s by American author and occultist Anton Sandor LaVey. He created the Satanic Bible and formed the Church of Satan, the most well satanic organization. LaVey's Satanism is atheistic. According to LaVey, neither God nor Satan are actual beings. The only God is LaVey's Satanism is the Satanist himself. Instead, Satan is a symbol representing qualities embraced by Satanists. Satanism, defined by LaVey, is a celebration of the self. It encourages people to seek their own truths, indulge in desires without fear of social taboos, and the perfect self. So, yeah, this would be considered non-theistic. So they don't believe in Satan, they don't believe in God. They believe, like most occult groups, becoming a god or raising oneself.
But, and I agree with you 100%. LaVey says that. But if you look into him and his family and some of the actual rituals they were doing, they were in contact with entities like Leviathan and this other, just they were going into the astral realm and they were dealing with these other, not people, spirits over there.
Right.
And so you don't believe in God, but you're dealing with a spirit, an evil spirit called Leviathan. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it's something biblical. Why are you interacting with something biblical if you think, God is just a myth or an idea? So yeah, that's one of those.
It's almost like there was a front there. They told people, "Oh, we don't believe in God. There's nothing supernatural happening here, folks."
Yeah, it seems like they're definitely hiding behind whatever their real truth is. And again, if you think about it, that's the occult. Whether it's lower levels in these groups don't know about what it's really about until they get to a certain level or not, or whether they're just hiding behind this smoke screen.
Right.
That what they contradict themselves all the time. I think one of these examples, one of the best examples, is so the Satanic Temple, who is Lucian Greaves, led by Lucian Greaves. I think his real name's like Brad Meltzer or something like that. They have on, it's part of their organization, but it's this page called the Gray Faction. And so the Gray Faction calls out all mental health professionals that work with satanic ritual abuse SRA survivors. And they say, you look at the page and they say this is a bunch of conspiracy bunk. It's this page and is to get rid of that, like that, this isn't any part of science. And it lists like all this information on all these different professionals who've worked with SRA victims. And it's like, well, if you don't believe in Satan, why are you worried about the mental health professionals working with victims who say they were abused by theistic Satanists, for Satan? Why are you concerned about that? It just makes absolutely no sense.
Yeah.
And then the other aspect of that, and this is not, I don't bring this up to do a political debate, but the Satanic Temple is also trying to get around abortions by saying it's religious for them and it's a ritual practice to feel empowered and everything. I have to tell you something. Most women, whether they're for abortion or not, they don't want to get that done. And a lot of times they deal with trauma, psychological trauma after that, whether they think it should be legal or not. It's a traumatizing experience. I can think of a lot of other ways women could empower themselves, as opposed to, you know what I'm going to do today? Feel empowered? I'm going to get an abortion. Like that is absurd to me. That is really dark and absurd to me. So I just don't feel like, regardless of a woman's political views about abortion, she would want to get an abortion to empower herself.
Sure. I mean, that's been not my experience, but a lot of the girls I've known who had abortions, they regretted them.
Right.
So, and that's all I'll say because,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's all I'll say. And it's one of those things. That's a tough one, and we're not going to get political here. I appreciate you saying that too. Like, but that's one of those issues that nobody will ever be able to agree fully on. So it's perfect as a political issue to divide and conquer people.
Oh, absolutely.
But yeah, when you look into it, a lot of the people who are having these, they're having second thoughts afterwards.
Yeah, and I mean, it's have you seen the movie Nefarious?
I don't think so.
It's a great movie. I knew it was on TV last. It came out in, I think, 2023, and it was an incredible movie. It was about an inmate who was supposedly, they didn't know for sure, no one knew for sure, was possessed, and this one psychiatrist that was interviewing to deem whether he was insane or not to be up for execution, and that psychiatrist dies. So another one comes in and he's trying to talk to him to decipher whether or not he's sane for execution. And it's and the way, I forget the name of the actor that played the guy, but he played in the movie. He's the lead in Powder. I can't remember his name. But he did such an excellent job of going back and forth between the real person in that body and this demon. But it was interesting to me. He did bring up to the psychiatrist abortions and Moloch.
Yeah.
So, and then, you see stuff like this going on and you can't help but wonder,
well, yeah,
like what kind of connection that might have. So, and they're talking about this being a ritual,
for sure. There's several guys who've come out of the Satanic Church, put it behind them, come out, told their stories on podcasts, and they talk about this. They talk about how the church was using the abortion. The church was performing abortions, Satanic Church here. And once the girl gets in there thinking it's going to be like like a charity thing, like we'll give you a free abortion, like we're going to help you out. The girl gets in there and they're wearing robes and they're going to drink the blood and they're do all this. They're using it for a purpose, a ritual purpose.
Well, yeah, and it would make sense if they did do that, because that's an easy way around, instead of like getting caught for a crime of actually like human sacrifice or sacrifice of a child.
Exactly.
So that's just one of those things that makes me think, well,
and that's not something I've read, that there are guys who have come out of the church who said this and as part of their, their testimony of what they've witnessed.
Yeah. So, and then the other thing I wanted to bring up. So, have you followed the Long Island serial killer case at all? And
no, but tell me about it.
So Rex Heuermann was arrested, and he's the one that's going to be tried for these crimes. And there's an attorney named John Ray who's representing the victims. And I didn't really put all this together, and it made more sense when he spoke about it a little bit more. But so there's a press conference, and I encourage anybody to watch it. They can find it, but where John Ray, he presents all this dark stuff that Rex Heuermann's daughter was into, all this dark art. Some she made herself, some she reposted, and it was all very violent, gory things, from anything from like people being murdered, disemboweled, and he talked about how she was also into, and I guess a lot of these things her father was into too, but I didn't even know something like this existed. But it's a type of, I guess, a form of pornography. It's called hard war, and it is cannibalism. And she was into some of this, and some of this artwork they showed depicted this. What they also found in Rex Heuermann's house after his arrest was there was a book, and it's called Death Scenes, a Homicide Detective Scrapbook by Jack Huddleston. And I think it was in maybe around the 30s or the 40s. This book was published, and it's all these terrible scenes of homicide victims and their mangled bodies. And John Ray, the attorney, had said this is a book a lot of Satanists have. And I thought, well, why is that? And then so I started looking at and he said something. There was a film that was narrated by LaVey based off the book. And I'm like, then the bells kind of went off
wow.
there.
Okay.
And I'm like, oh, okay, because Anton LaVey narrated this film. And they're called, I guess, Mondo films, which they exploit humans in various ways. Like an example would be like in taboo topics with humans, but an example of this would be like, the faces of death. But I guess they did a Mondo film based off this book, and they named it Death Scenes, and it was a film by Nick Bogas, I guess. But Anton LaVey narrated it. So it just seems, they are almost condoning violent behavior.
Sure. And a lot of those, well, the rumor is about those films is that some of them feature people actually being killed, being filmed.
Yeah, like Many Faces of Death, those are people actually dying on film. And, so
it's so dark. That is so dark.
Yes. So that's a little bit about the non-theistic or rationalistic Satanism. Like we both agree there seems to be more to it behind that. That seems to be a front they're hiding behind for what their real agenda is. Although I do have to say, Anton LaVey, and I'm going to get into next, Michael Aquino, who was in the Satanic Church, and how he broke off because he didn't like how LaVey was accepting money for people to move through the Satanic Church.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to talking about him some. But let me just say something here. Nobody is making these people use the term Satanism.
Mm-hmm.
If you can change the name of your religion, you can create your own religion. We're in America, you can do whatever you want. And if you don't believe in Satan or God, you can become a humanist.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to use the term Satan.
No.
That's what's always confused me about this.
Yes.
Why are they still using that term?
Yes. Like why are they using the goat of Mendez head, in the pinnacle? Why is the Satanic temple moving this big statue of Baphomet around with children on it, putting it on displays in various locations like courthouses and stuff like that? So it's just like, you say you're not, but yet you're using all the symbolism. You seem like behind the scenes maybe there's something more to it. You contradict yourself. So
in the pentagrams too. And like I knew people back in high school who got into goth and Satanism and all that stuff. And like at first, because all these major figures of the movement are in front of the camera saying, oh, we don't even believe in God. All these kids got into it. And then the next thing you know, a couple weeks in, they're drawing pentagrams on their basement floor and they're doing actual rituals. It doesn't take long for them to realize, oh, we really are doing this, I guess.
Yeah. And it drives me crazy too when a lot of times people are discounted because they almost modify Satanism to what they think Satanism is, but it's still dark things they're doing. And I think that's part of where the Lanning report goes wrong. They said it has to be a group of people, and it almost like it has to be like a recognized like group or whatever. And it's like, what? It's like they want you to be considered to be a Satanist. You have to like, or a satanic crime, you have to like hop on your left foot, hold your nose, and turn around in a circle, like some fancy dance or something. Like it just doesn't make sense. They make it almost like impossible for anything to be considered a satanic or an occult crime. But clearly we're seeing these things.
A lot of people would love to believe that this is a myth. It's all myth. It's like unicorns and fairies.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. So next I'm going to hop on over to theistic or esoteric Satanism, and we're going to start with the Temple of Set. And so in 1974, Michael Aquino, who was involved in psychological warfare, highly ranked in the army, and also was accused in the Presidio of abusing children.
He's an
But
interesting
yes,
character.
he is. Yes.
I don't know whether to laugh or to be creeped out completely by
Yeah, I
him.
feel like it's a combination of both, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, there are really weird aspects to what he did, but then again,
Yeah.
like he was on a talk show talking about how he had a birthmark, a natural birthmark in the shape of a swastika. And I just
Mm-hmm.
laughed. I'm like, this is so stupid.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Because
Yep.
people, people are like, taking it so seriously.
Yep.
And I'm just like, that is
Right.
the dumbest, hokiest thing. But
Yep.
he's also super weird. And he was literally involved with PSYOP,
Mm-hmm.
like some
Yep.
sort of a government military unit that actually used the term PSYOP.
Yep. Yep. And it's interesting. You did you know he did a ritual in the crypt of Wolfsburg's castle? They let him Himmler's castle. They let him do a ritual down there in that chamber.
That's telling. That's very telling.
Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah. So, but Michael Aquino, a member of the hierarchy of the Church of Satan, and Lilith St. Clair, a group leader, or was called a grotto master, broke away from the Church of Satan on philosophical grounds and formed the splinter group Temple of Set. In the resulting theistic Satanism, practitioners recognized the existence of one or more supernatural beings. The major god, viewed as a father or older brother, is often called Satan, but some groups identify the leader as a version of the ancient Egyptian god Set. Set is a spiritual entity based on the ancient Egyptian notion of expert, translated as self improvement or self creation. Regardless of the being or beings in charge, none of them resemble the Christian Satan. Instead, they are beings which have the same general qualities as the symbolic Satan: sexuality, pleasure, strength, and rebellion against Western mores. So again, it always seems like they're high, self-improvement, become a god, like, but it's not really that satanic. We don't really believe in Satan, going just again kind of contradicting
I mean, yeah,
themselves.
what's the difference if you're trying to contact an ancient deity named Set?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You might as well just believe in Satan as well, or
Right.
or some sort of a major figure in a pantheon of deities. Whether or not you
Mm-hmm.
want to call it Satan or not, who
Right.
cares?
Right.
We're still dealing with the supernatural and people trying to
Yeah.
contact entities.
Yeah. And I feel like from her article, she explains it decent, but I feel like I want to expound upon it on a little bit more so it's a little bit clear as to what the temple set is and what they believe. So some of this might be repeated, but I think it's important to touch on it to get a better picture. So the Temple of Set was established in the United States in 1975 by Aquino, an American political scientist, military officer, and high-ranking member of Anton LaVey's Church of Satan. Dissatisfied with the direction in which LaVey was taking the church, Aquino resigned and, according to his claim, embarked on a ritual to invoke Satan. Okay, I thought it wasn't a satanic thing, but okay, gotcha. Where was I that? So, who revealed to him a sacred text called the Book of Coming Forth by Night. According to Aquino, in the work, Satan revealed his true name to be that of Set, which had been the name used by the followers in ancient Egypt. Aquino was joined in establishing the temple by a number of other dissatisfied members of LaVey's church, and soon various Setian groups were established across the United States. Setians believe that Set is the one real God and that he has aided humanity by giving them a questioning intellect, the quote, black flame, unquote, which distinguishes them from other animal species. Set is held in high self-esteem as a teacher whose example is to be emulated, but he is not to be worshipped as a deity. Highly individualistic in basis, the temple promotes the idea that practitioners should seek self-deification and thus attain an immortality of consciousness. Setians believe in the existence of magic as a force which can be manipulated through ritual. However, the nature of these rituals is not prescribed by the temple. Specifically, Aquino described Setian practices as black magic, a term which he identifies idiosyncratically. So,
Can I point something out here? That
yeah.
black flame of Set sounds a lot like the black sun
That's
symbol.
what, yeah, that's what I was
When you
thinking.
look into like what it refers to, and that you mentioned he did go to Vilsburg Castle.
Yes,
That
he did.
that is that symbol, Black Sun symbol, is featured there prominently in that
Yes.
castle.
Yep.
He was probably tying that in. He had to have
Oh,
been.
absolutely. Yeah, no, I definitely believe he
Because
had
they
a
believed in an
Nazi ideology in his
yes,
in
because the Nazis and that symbol, the Black Sun, it referred to inner Earth and there being a black sun that powered the inner Earth.
hmm
So then you could, through occult means you could kind of harness some of that power. That's
right.
what they believed.
Yeah, and I forgot to mention, well, Anton LaVey's daughter, oh God, I can't, her name's slipping my mind right now. She broke away from the Church of Satan. She thought her father was a fraud. It was found out he plagiarized a lot of the Satanic Bible that he wrote. And that is why a lot of people went, including his daughter, went over to the Temple of Set. And then later she broke away from the Temple of Set and started kind of a similar but not the same kind of Satanism. So super bizarre stuff. So,
Yes,
but it's
yeah.
interesting how they broke away
Well,
from a non-theistic branch and went into kind of a theistic, even though they're still trying to dodge, that they're Satanists or they believe in that kind of stuff.
yeah, yeah. And I mean, it's so out there in your face to what they're doing. I mean, all it takes is just a cursory 10-minute little run of research to find that yes, they do believe in black magic. You said it right there.
Mm-hmm.
But when you look at Google images of the Aquinos, his wife, or even LeVay's and his kids, um, all the images that pop up are like they are obviously into the occult. It's almost like a Nirvana photo shoot where you're
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, this is a grunge band. I don't even need to hear them. You know what I mean? It's like it's like every Google image you see of these people, they're wearing black, they've got pentagrams, they've
Mm-hmm.
got goats behind them, they're in some weird room with like candles, and it's
Right.
just like this is just so obvious. It's so
Mm-hmm.
dumb to say that these
Mm-hmm.
people weren't into
Yep.
this stuff.
Yeah, and Anton LaVey was quite the showman too. Like I think he
Hmm.
was in like a carnival or circus before he started the Church of Satan. Have you ever heard? And I find this really funny because she does look like she could be his daughter. That some people believe Taylor Swift is his daughter.
Yeah, that's funny.
She does that. She does
She's
resemble. Maybe that.
inadvertently she's starting to act like it too.
Yeah, yeah, that's the thing. It's getting real weird, but she looks like him and she looks like his daughter too. So
Hmm.
it's super crazy. So the next thing I want to touch on is demonolatry, and it's basically the worship of demons, but some sects see each demon as a separate force or energy that can be used to aid in the practitioner's rituals or magic. The book entitled Modern Demonology by S. Conley lists well over 200 demons. And I always found that interesting because there was 200 fallen watcher angels.
Yeah.
So I found that kind of interesting. But well over 200 demons from a multitude of different religions, ancient and modern. Adherents choose to worship demons that mirror their own attributes or ones with whom they share a connection. And this kind of reminded me of the Goetia, the mid 17th century, based off pseudographical text, Testament of Solomon. And it brought to mind how I must have been, I can't remember, I must have been looking something up on Amazon about Nephilim.
Hmm.
And I inadvertently found a book called Liber Nephilim, a grimoire of fallen angels by Frater Brabus. And
Hmm.
Brabus was, according to the New Testament, was a prisoner who was chosen over Jesus by the crowd in Jerusalem to be pardoned and released by Pontius Pilate, as it was a prevailing Passover custom at the time. So his name's kind of tongue in cheek, an anti-Christianity reference. But this
That's
was a
interesting.
grimoire that is to summon Nephilim.
Hmm. Well, I mean, I believe it. They a lot of the interpretation of the Nephilim from books like the Book of Enoch,
Mm-hmm.
which I consider to be extra biblical and legit.
Yes, me too.
They refer to these as disembodied spirits.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yep. So I definitely agree with you on that. So
Hmm.
I definitely think the Book of
Is
Enoch
is
is
this
legit.
Liber Nephilim? Is it a black magic book? Or,
It sounds like it.
yeah, it sounds
It's
like I just pulled it
yeah,
up. It looks like it too.
yeah.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. It's got some sigils on it and everything. So yeah, I saw that and I was like, wow, that's wild.
Yeah, that is
Um,
wild.
and I'm just like thinking, play stupid game, win stupid prizes. That doesn't sound like something you should really be doing. But
Yeah,
hey,
yeah.
so but yeah, I found that extremely fascinating. But and I, it wasn't until after the Book of Enoch that when I read it that so much more of the Bible made sense to me.
Absolutely.
From Satan, it said there'd be animosity between the woman and
Hmm.
the serpent because he was going to, corrupt the bloodline. And
Hmm.
so then you had these Nephilim and stuff, and then you look at things like that, this bloodline that God wiped out with a flood, and then you look at how some of them didn't get completely wiped out. And I always used to question, why would God want, Moses and Joshua to wipe out Canaan, everything in it, women, children, animals? And then it made sense when I read that. And then,
Absolutely.
when
I
it's
mean, that kept going too. It wasn't just Israelites. Like
yeah.
Canaanites survived. They weren't able to wipe them all out. And later
Mm-hmm.
the Roman Empire came up against Canaanites. And the Roman Empire was cool with integrating with a lot of the cultures they conquered,
Mm-hmm.
not with the Canaanites. They said, no, kill them all.
Yeah.
They're too vile. We don't want to
Mm-hmm.
integrate with them. If you're too
Yeah.
vile for the Roman Empire,
Mm-hmm.
you're that's bad. That's
Yeah.
you're savage, complete
Yeah.
savage.
Right.
And it was the witchcraft though. It was the old Nephilim witchcraft is
Mm-hmm.
what they didn't like. They were cannibals and they were doing all this crazy stuff,
Yes,
this really
the
dark stuff.
sacrificing kids to Moloch, and yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other part, that made more sense too was, a lot of people think Sodom and Gomorrah, is, homosexuality and stuff, but these people clearly knew these strangers were angels when they talked about strange flesh.
Yes.
So it's like they were thinking they were Nephilim, and
Yes.
just like the Nephilim, the Watchers,
Mm-hmm.
had impregnated human women. It just makes so much more sense
Yeah,
now that I.
it does. It does. And in Genesis 3:15, I think you alluded to it, where it talks about the enmity between the serpent seed and the seed
Mm-hmm.
of Eve.
Yep.
You see that as a common theme throughout the Bible. Once you see it, it's
Right.
harder to unsee it. And it refers to this battle that is taking
Mm-hmm.
place between humans that are genetically pure, I guess you could say.
Yes.
Like we're still human, right?
Mm-hmm.
And these children of the gods, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
these Nephilim, they're the descendants of the Watchers.
Right.
But there's a war going on with that.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had Justin Brown on from Prometheus Lens. He does a great job of breaking that down, and he expands it to where it's not just the Nephilim. There's a seed of Cain involved with this war as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But basically, it's like humans versus non-humans
Yep.
because there were non-humans among us, maybe still are.
And I think that when you look in the book of Revelation, I think when they say you take the mark of the beast, I think it's going to be something that alters your DNA, and
Yes, I
will no
agree.
longer be human, and you've given up your birthright, you've given up your humanity, and Christ didn't come to die for anything but humans. And once you give that up, you're no longer redeemable.
I think so too. And when I found out about this seed war and the Nephilim and all the stuff that you're laying out very nicely here, when I had that, I had a revelatory moment where I thought about this as well, this mark of the beast thing that we've been hearing about for our whole lives. And
Mm-hmm.
it made sense to me. It's like, okay, God sent the flood to try and get rid of these Nephilim,
Mm-hmm.
to try to get rid of this bastardized DNA thing, right?
Right.
It was a DNA cleanse.
Yep.
And he said, I'll never destroy the earth again with water. I'm just going to do it probably one more time with fire. That's how it
Mm-hmm.
reads to me.
Yep.
And it will
Yep.
probably be the same type of a thing where it's like, okay, the humans are corrupting their DNA again, and God seems to despise that.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, and I think that's where everything's going with technology. Even
Yes.
CERN's trying to open portals, like,
Oh, yeah.
and who knows what they're going to bring through. Like, so, yeah,
Oh, yeah.
for sure. So I was next going to move on to Christian-based duotheism and polytheistic Satanism. And it's a minor sect of theistic Satanism reported by Satanist Diane Vera. Is the Christian-based duotheism. Its practitioners accept that there is an ongoing war between the Christian God and Satan, but unlike Christians, they support Satan. Vera says the sect is based on ancient Zoroastrianism beliefs about an eternal conflict between good and evil. Another offshoot of theistic Satanism are polytheistic groups such as the Church of Azazel, which revere Satan as one of many gods. So here's like a really good classic example. They're saying, we believe Satan exists, we believe God exists, but we're on Satan's side. And it may be a smaller sect, but there's also people, I like to call them individuals who modify, whatever their idea of Satanism is with a blend of things. And a lot of them do believe that they're worshiping Satan, the dark god, or the Prince of Darkness or whatever.
And even Azazel too. Like
yeah,
that just goes back to what we were just talking about. Azazel, I think, if I remember correctly, was one of the Watchers.
Yes, he was.
Because he was locked in the earth by Raphael for
Yes.
teaching humans advanced technologies and witchcraft and stuff like that.
And he's where like the scapegoat came from and everything, and like throwing the sins of and pushing the goats off the cliff, to cleanse people of, as before Christ came and died, to cleanse people of their sins and everything. So, but yes, he was one of the Watcher angels. I believe he was one of them. I think he like taught humans to make weapons for war.
That's true. That's right.
I think so.
It was weaponry, and there were a couple of other things.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, and I think we did touch on abortion, and again, not to be political, but I was blown away how the Book of Enoch talked about a Watcher that aided women in abortion, and it talked about smiting the embryo, and that just blew my mind like that.
Wow, I didn't ever picked up on that before.
That's yes, I'll have to find it, but
that sounds like a term I've read though in there. Did they say that in the verse?
Yeah,
smiting the embryo.
Smite the embryo.
It never occurred to me what that meant.
Yeah, and I was just like, whoa. I was like, so again,
that's crazy.
Yeah. So, all right, let's see. Move on next. So next is Transcendental Satanism. This is a really weird one, but it's a sect created by Matt, and he went by the Lord Zane, and he was an adult video director whose brand of Satanism came to him in a dream after taking the drug LSD. Transcendental Satanists seek a form of spiritual evolution with the end goal of each individual a reunification with his or her inner satanic aspect. Followers feel that the satanic aspect in life is hidden part of the self that is separate from consciousness, and believers can find their way to that self by following an individually determined path. So I don't know, it sounds to me like it's a satanic sect that's fueled by drugs and sex. I don't know, but it
sounds
really
like
weird.
Crowley sounds like something Crowley.
Yes, and it does make sense a little bit because you think about the sex magic and everything, and I do truly believe when you do some of these substances, like whether it's DMT, LSD, ayahuasca, you are thinning the veil between worlds or realms. And I think that's why a lot of times people talk about seeing the same things like machine elves or something like that, is because the veil is thinning.
Yeah.
What do you think?
It's not
do you think that?
I think so too. Yeah, it's not just machine elves. And I mean, I've told the story on here several times where I know a person who got super deep into DMT culture, had I'll just put it this way. This person had unlimited access to DMT. They took it a lot. And they were talking to the same entity every time they took because you go in for 15 minutes or something like that. It's a real short trip, but you feel like you're in there longer. Right. But he would go back in and continue the conversation he had from the last trip with the same entity. And it wasn't a machine elf, which I know that's what a lot of people see, but this was an ancient feminine Norse entity.
Oh, wow.
Who told him her name, and she was acting like a spirit guide almost for him.
Wow, that's crazy. Well, and then you also hear, and don't do this at home, kids, it's not advisable. People who like try to trip on Benadryl, which is extremely dangerous, and then it can be an extremely awful, bad, painful trip to begin with. But they talk about seeing the Hat Man.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just interesting how a lot of people seem to see similar things when they
Yes.
do these kind of drugs. So the next group I'm going to talk about is Satanic Reds, and they view Satan as a dark force that has existed since the beginning of time. Its major proponent, and I'm probably going to butcher this guy's name, Tani Jansang, claims a pre-Sanskrit history of the cult and believes that individuals must follow their own chakras to find their inner force. The inner force exists in everyone and is trying to evolve according to each individual's environment. The Reds is an explicit reference to socialism. Many satanic Reds espouse the rights of workers to throw off their chains. And I find that interesting. I mean, just all of these interesting. It's all, even though a lot of these are Satanism, it's all about self-deification, becoming a god, all of the, the little new age terms, of enlightenment. And this is just another one example. It just seems like it's a common theme through all of these, whether it's theistic or non-theistic.
Yes.
All right. Let's see. I think I skipped one of these. Hold on. Yes, I did. So I skipped this accidentally, but I didn't cover Luciferianisms.
Oh, yeah.
Luciferians. So they see themselves as a separate branch of Satanism, which combines elements of rational and theistic forms. It is largely a theistic branch, although there are some who see Satan, who's called Lucifer, as symbolic rather than an actual being. Luciferians use the term Lucifer in its literal sense. The name means light bringer in Latin. Rather than being a figure of challenge, rebellion, and sensuality, Lucifer is seen as a creature of enlightenment, the one who brings light out of the darkness. Practitioners embrace the seeking of knowledge, delving into the darkness of mystery and coming out better for it. Think Adam and Eve and Prometheus. They stress the balance of light and dark and that each depends upon the other. While Satanism revels in physical existence and Christianity focus more on spirituality, Luciferians see the religion as one that seeks a balance of both, that human existence is an intersection of the two. So when you think of it, it's interesting how through some of the mythology of Greek and Romans and everything, these gods, there's just so much similarity between Lucifer and just the Bible and stuff. And like Prometheus, he's kind of similar to the serpent in the Garden of Eden, by giving fire to man against the god's wishes, whereas the serpent in the garden was giving knowledge, was liberating Adam and Eve, because Luciferians look at God as an oppressor, that humankind is enslaved to him. And this serpent, Nakash, was the liberator and, gave us free will and knowledge. And, I would think a lot of people that maybe had a bad experience with like Christianity or something could see like this can almost sound romanticized to them, and they want to go the opposite direction, because it doesn't sound like, the typical, satanic group. Like it's not, talking about all the darkness and everything. And I did find it interesting that
it makes Satanism sound like it's misunderstood.
They view right, exactly. And I think this is almost like inverting to me, but it says, Lucifer is the one who brings light out of the darkness.
Sure.
And you do see a lot of biblical scripture about, light penetrating the dark and the dark not understanding it. And so it's almost like an inversion in every aspect you can think of when you look at that. So
yeah, and that word Nakash, I think it's the Hebrew translation of it, comes out to shining one. So this was, and Lucifer was referred to as the morning star.
Yes.
And some of these other entities were also called morning stars. I think that there's some parallels between that terminology and the Watchers as well. But we're talking about a celestial entity who is shiny here. It's just,
Yep.
it doesn't mean that they're working with light to bring,
Yeah.
satisfaction to our
Sure.
lives.
Sure. Although these people,
Right.
Luciferians and things, they believe that.
Yes.
So I just found that, and I on my profiles and stuff on social media, I have Luke chapter 12, verses 2 through 3, which talks about what's done in the darkness will be brought to the light. Because that's what I feel like I'm trying to do with my research and podcasts and everything is bring what is done in the darkness out into the light, and to show people the research, tell them where they can find it, because
Awesome.
anymore it's really hard to find stuff. I mean, you can't use Google. The Google's not going to give you like any kind of authentic results.
No, it's
They're
not.
going
It goes back to something you were saying earlier about the debunking, the
Mhm.
people who are trying to debunk stuff like that. That's all a government. Speaking of psyop, it's all a
Mhm.
government or psyop. Essentially, it's like
Mhm.
all the Instagram debunking, all those. I can't remember the names. There's several companies who
Snopes.
Snopes. They all have government back channels. They
Hmm.
all work for they worked for the Biden administration for
Right.
4 years, for sure.
Oh yeah, for
It's
sure.
not
Yeah.
about truth, people. These
Mm-mm.
people are about pushing a narrative. They're not debunking anything.
Nope.
And that's what Google is riddled with, is this kind of stuff.
Hmm. And when I research, and I think a lot of people just they just type something in the search, and when they get results, like they automatically think they have the answer. You got to really do like cross referencing, being careful, like don't use mainstream media sites. That you're not going to get real answers there.
Mm-hmm.
So um
Politico, Snopes, and there's a
I
couple others that I was thinking
think there's
about.
fact checker.
Yeah, fact checker, all that
So
stuff. They're not,
mhm. And
newsflash, folks. They're
right.
not giving you a correct version of history or the truth.
Mhm. Yeah, and when I do my research too, I do try to I'm not going to like Reddit or something like that, like finding my research and stuff. So, but so many people nowadays they don't understand, or else they're just lazy, um, to find this information. And I think it's we are becoming what should be replacing mainstream media, because we are the ones that are trying to put the truth and factual things out there, because you're not going to get that from mainstream media anymore.
No,
And
you're
it
not.
you're going to get it from independent researchers, independent journalists,
Yeah.
and things like that. And even like a lot of times when with books, like reference books, I like to actually buy the physical book, even though you can find the PDFs online a lot of time, because a classic example would be William Cooper's Behold a Pale Horse. You can go to Amazon and you can look in the comments, and people who have earlier editions, there's a chapter in the book that's not in the most recent.
Hmm.
And so between doing things like that and scrubbing the internet, I feel like we're in a modern day book burning
Well, it's
situation.
happening. Yeah, that they changed the ending of one of George Orwell's books. The CIA
Mm.
did. They bought the rights to Animal Farm
Mm-hmm.
and they changed the end of it.
It's incredible. It
Yeah.
it's it just it just when you get any easier, they do. And I think this is why we do do what we do, is because people need to know this. Like,
It is.
you
It's
can't just we're just being force fed propaganda and agendas that
yeah.
aren't true. And if people think like Operation Mockingbird ended, it didn't. And
No,
you
it
got the
didn't.
Modernization Act of 2012, which says they can feed propaganda to us again.
Yep.
Like, I mean,
Yeah, and you're right, it's nothing new. It used to be called Mockingbird, now it's called something else. The Smith Month, that was based on a bill Truman introduced way
mm-hmm.
back in the day. Obama
Yep,
just revised it.
right.
And this propaganda thing has seeped in, like it really took hold. I'm hoping one day I'll have the time and the resources to do a documentary on this, because I looked into it and I found that in 1954, under the Eisenhower administration, uh, all this stuff just really kicked in gear, and like this wave of propaganda swept over America, and most people don't even know it happened, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and it's important because of the year, because MK Ultra started in 53. And in
Mm-hmm.
54, Eisenhower teams up with the Dulles brothers and Ed Bernays, and they just unleashed all this propaganda, but it coincides with MK Ultra running in the background. So,
Mm-hmm.
and then at the same time, you've got the military working with Hollywood, pushing their
Yep.
narrative in all the movies,
Yep.
and the DoD backing tons of movies. There's a list online. So this stuff goes deep, and it's been happening for a long time. We're coming up on almost 100 years of very dense propaganda that we've been programmed by.
Mm-hmm.
And like you're saying, like shows like mine, shows like yours, I'm trying to chip away at that and help out with some of the deprogramming. I'm
Right.
trying, you know,
Right. Absolutely.
without shaking people to death and screaming at people
Yeah.
you know, and just acting like a fat sweaty Baptist preacher about it. You know,
Right. Right.
I'm trying to like show people, look, I realized that I had been programmed and
Oh
I
yeah.
was being lied to, and I looked at the world one day and I was like, wow, I've had enough of this.
Yep.
And I
Yep.
was talking about
100%.
this on a show the other day, and you know, I think I said it like this is like a new age of pirate radio where the podcasters are leading the charge with this right now.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we all had that point in time where, we had that awakening that things aren't as they seem to be. And that's all you can do. And there's so many great podcasters out there and researchers, but you're right. There are some that are very crass as, as to how they approach in getting the word out there. And I'm like looking at some of these people, I'm like, you are so abrasive. Like, no wonder,
Hmm.
we get the crazy name, the conspiracy theorists, and we're
Yeah.
crazy and this and that. Like, look at yourself. I wouldn't want to listen to you either if I hadn't, got to the moment where it's like, well, something, started connecting the
It
dots. And
just yeah, and I know what you mean. And yeah, there's some people out there that could tone it down, but I
Mhm,
was more thinking about growing up in the South, and
mhm,
we moved quite a bit, so I was in and out of several different churches, and I
mhm,
just remember how some of those pastors would act.
mhm.
And in my adulthood now, I look back at that, I'm like, that is not the way to present any kind of a message to people.
No, no,
I
not at
try
all.
to avoid that.
Yeah,
That
and the thing is, I mean, I identify as a Christian, but non-denominational, because I don't organized religion has gotten too political for
for
me.
sure.
And so I'm non-denominational. I can't say I go to church, but I do my daily devotionals. I spend time with God. Some of the times I feel closest to God is when I'm out in nature. I'm very into fitness and I'm active and stuff. And I feel I'm closest to God sometimes, just outside in nature and everything like
Same
that.
for me,
So, and the
100%.
thing is, there's what bothers me also too, and I've talked to many individuals about this, whether it's Derek Gilbert, Ryan Peterson, or Gary Wayne. The churches aren't talking about spiritual warfare,
No.
because they're more worried about their attendance numbers.
Mhm.
Um, and these are important things we should be talking about.
Yes.
So,
Yeah, I think, and I just had this conversation just the other day. I was echoing a lot of the things that you're saying here,
mhm,
and I agree with you. They're not talking about spiritual warfare, and there's a couple things we talked about earlier that are key. Until pastors start talking about Genesis 6 and the seed
mhm.
war and what's really happening with the spiritual
Yep,
warfare, nobody in church is going to know what's happening. And I
yep,
know I might be
100%.
stepping on some toes right now. I know some people might not like to hear that because they're invested in their church. I
Mhm.
know there's good churches out there too. I'm not
Yeah,
slamming
sure.
all of them, but I you're getting the big picture or you're not. You're
Right.
still sitting in the dark, in my opinion. And this
Mhm.
spiritual warfare is key. We've got to get a grasp on this. People need to understand that this is an ancient war that we were born into.
Yep. 100%. 100%. Yeah, I
And it's
couldn't agree
still
more.
active. These
Yeah.
forces are all around us
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah, and they're getting stronger because I mean,
Yes.
ultimately we will be in the book of Revelation. Like that's where things are headed.
That's where
So,
it seems to be headed. I
mhm.
mean, even in my research too, it goes to you mentioned CERN earlier. A book of Revelation talks about Abaddon.
Mhm.
and the old Roman temple of Abaddon is what CERN is on top of.
Right.
And in the past, and I think it's the same passage, it talks about Ashtar, and that's a whole other planet of worms. But I think she's involved with a lot of this UFO stuff that's happening right now.
Yeah.
So it all goes back to these characters in this spiritual war.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So the last type of Satanism I have to discuss is the Cult of Cthulhu, which is based on the H.P. Lovecraft novels. The cults of Cthulhu are small groups which have arisen within the same name but have radically different goals. Some believe that the fictional creature was real and will eventually usher in an era of chaos and uninhibited violence, wiping out humanity in the process. Others simply subscribe to the philosophy of Cthulhu, a philosophy of cosmic indifferentism, that the universe is a meaningless and mechanical system that is indifferent to the existence of human beings. Other members of the cult are not Satanists at all, but use the cult to celebrate Lovecraft's ingenuity. I love H.P. Lovecraft, but I'm going to tell you right now, I think he was channeling something to get these ideas for these creatures and these stories. Just like I feel like H.R. Geiger, who created the Alien from the movie Alien and did all the artwork, I think he was channeling something. And when I researched him and I watched a documentary on him, people that worked for him said, we think he was channeling something. I'm like, you think?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you can find where Lovecraft alluded to channeling. I don't know that he actually said he was, I don't think he used that terminology, but with Carl Jung and Crowley and Lovecraft, they'll often talk about the muse, but if you pay attention, they're not talking about it in a traditional artistry sense. They're talking about getting their ideas from somewhere else, from something else.
And that's a good point you bring up. Like, so many people wouldn't think, Carl Jung, who had played a big part in like psychiatry and everything, was an occultist.
Yeah.
And I think, are you familiar with the Myers-Briggs personality test that he did?
No, but I know he wrote a book literally called Psychology and the Occult.
Yeah. Oh,
but what about the Briggs thing?
So you can take it. I've taken it. You can take it online for free. But there's 16 different personality types that you could be. And the way he has them so detailed, and my results, everything I've read about, it was scary. It was so accurate. And I actually took it on 2 different websites. And then the one website I used it initially, it sends me like things about my personality that are really interesting to read and everything. And it said it did some update. It's like, and encourage people to retake the test again to see if they got the same thing. And I did. But I went to a different website initially, tried it because I got what was considered the rarest type, which was an INFJ, which is introvert, feeling, intuition, feeling, and judging, but not like judging as being a judging person, but like being organized and planning things out or whatever. But and I just read about it, and it was so scary how accurate it was. And I just feel like that's another thing, like, that's beyond human ability to gain all that knowledge and to be so on point with it. It's just wild to me.
It's like maybe this is a crude example, but it reminds me of like a Ouija board. Like, it does work. You do talk to something that's not necessarily visible to you in the room, but it's based on something. There's a technology there that's allowing something to happen, right? So maybe there's an underlying technology, scaffolding, an occult scaffolding to this test.
Yes. So, but yeah, I encourage people to check that out. It's definitely super interesting.
Yeah.
But so yeah, that's what I have for today to cover. I'd be happy to come back because the next part is probably the more interesting part, because I start talking about ritual homicide and the types of perpetrators associated with ritual homicide, and then also actual cases, and talking about the landing report a little bit too. So, But so we got through some of the more, well, I wouldn't say all of it's dry, but some of it was a little bit repetitive and stuff. But
No, this was good. Well, I'll have to have you back on
yeah,
to
I
go
love
into
that.
this,
So
I guess, the second part. But yeah,
right.
you know, like people have and this might go back to programming,
Mm-hmm.
come to think of it, but people have this block where they don't want to see some of this stuff for what it is.
Yeah.
I see it all the time with the bands.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I first moved to Nashville, like a couple years after I was out here, because I knew a bunch of rockers, and like I was doing a project with a big rock star guy. Like I won't say his name because that's not the point, but I was working with a guy on a project who was in a big band. So I was in circles with all these rock musicians, right? And everybody got into this band called Ghost.
I
And
did a big post about Ghost on my Instagram a long time ago, and I went through all the album artwork and about the songs, like,
well,
and
okay, so
they,
you know,
yeah,
so and what they were everybody said, I was always like, yeah, they're like, oh man, you gotta, why don't you like Ghost like, you know, like we do? Why don't you vibe to it like we do? I'm like, I I like the music, like I don't like the message, like guys, because I don't worship Satan. And they're
mm-hmm.
like, oh, there's it's not really a Satanist. He's not really a Satanist. I'm like, so the
No, he is.
lyrics are Satan.
They admit it. They admit, like, you go online and look it
I
up.
know the Tobias dude. I looked into him. I know. I mean, I think maybe he finally came out with it. But
Mm-hmm.
when this band got big 7 years ago or whatever it was, they weren't telling people that it was real. People didn't
Mm-hmm.
think it was real, and I kept
Right.
trying to tell my friends, "No, this is real." Somebody bought me a ticket, so I went to see this band, and this was in Louisville. And I didn't want to go, but they bought me the ticket, so I went. And every occultist in Kentucky was at this place, dressed in black. It was the weirdest thing. Everybody was, before the show started, there's all these people wearing pentagrams and decked out in all black, standing on this in this street corner, waiting to go in this old timey theater to see this band. Everybody's smoking cigarettes, looking at each other in silence. It was just the weirdest vibe. And I get in there, and people, when this band starts playing, people are in there acting like they're at a worship service with their hands up, with their eyes closed, like
Wow.
literally worshiping Satan
Mm-hmm.
or whatever occult
Mm-hmm.
dark entity they were into. It
Yeah.
wasn't God. And I was just like, this is this is real. Like people
Yeah.
just, but people were so adamant, like, oh no, you don't get it, Tim. You just don't get it. They're not really Satanists. That's the thing.
Yeah, no, when I was actually
Come on.
researching them, that is where I found out they actually identify as Satanist. And I was disappointed to learn that, because there was a couple songs I thought they did were kind of catchy. I think Dance
Yeah,
Macabre was one, and the
they
other
have some
one,
cool songs. I'll give them that.
and then the other one that I really liked, they did a great cover of Tina Turner's "We Don't Need Another Hero."
Hmm.
Like,
Yeah, right, right.
but like, I mean, they had
The
artwork.
talent is there, and I picked up
Yeah.
on that in the live show. Like it was one of the best um spectacles. It was one of the best live shows. He had three guitar players, they were all solid, and it was very sonic in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
you know, when you listen to that band on their recordings, it's got this old classic, almost bluish or cult kind of a vibe. But when you go see them live, it's very sonic and big
Yeah.
and powerful. So there's a lot of talent there, and the
Yeah.
songwriting talent there is prevalent as well.
Yeah, and when they had certain artwork they wanted to come out with that they were told they couldn't, it was so controversial and blasphemous. It was pretty much an orgy on God's throne with God and Jesus Christ crucified in the back, but upside down. I mean, it was
Of
really, really
course.
like blatant, like stuff like that. So
Yeah.
yeah, no, that you're totally spot on with that. So, but I had done a post on my Instagram a couple years ago about that, because there was so much blatant stuff there, and like people just, if people don't know. Have you
Everybody
seen?
was, and nobody was telling these people to be in denial about this. That's the
Nah.
funny. That's why I say there's got to be some programming
Well,
happening
yeah,
here
because
with
think
us.
about how years ago they were saying, "Oh, these bands, they were responsible for people doing violent things," and then eventually, like, they're Satanists. There's some truth to it, like, but everybody's so used to years ago it being, part of the satanic panic or a hoax or whatever, or, people just singing and being edgy.
Yeah, right,
But that
right.
there's some truth in some of these bands. It is their thing. It is their religion. It is their ideology and beliefs.
Yeah, and I think some of these guys like Ozzy were putting on a show.
Sure.
It. I don't know. I mean, maybe he did kind of get into the occult behind closed doors some. I don't know, but
Mhm.
from what I can tell, I think with him, the whole Prince of Darkness thing was
Mhm.
more of a I'm a Prince of selling records thing.
Yeah.
And I'm shocking people because it's publicity
Yeah.
and it makes my band huge. And like, let me say this too about Ghost for people out there. I'm not going to condemn anybody for liking that band. That's not my point.
Mhm. Mhm.
Love that band if you want, but just realize what it
Just
is.
know. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think two other examples I can think of offhand are John Frusciante from the Red Hot Chili Peppers. He admitted he was in a really dark
Really?
place with drugs, and that he was. Yeah, I have a post on that some on my
Oh,
Instagram
I'd like
too.
to hear about that because I've always heard the smoke around him as well. And it's funny because the guy I was working on this project with, um, he knows Frusciante. He
Mm-hmm.
hung out with him.
Yeah, there's articles that said, and where he admits he's like, I was really into the occult, and then he also was, using a lot of drugs and everything.
Hmm.
Um, and then the
Nikki
other,
Six was another one. I had a book. I used to be
the
really into
Heroin
all this.
Diaries.
Yeah, it was either that or it was called Dirt,
Oh, Dirt was about the
the
band in
Motley
its
Crue. But
entirety. The Heroin Diaries was about his drug
I
addiction.
think somebody let me borrow Heroin Diaries though,
Yeah.
because that's got to be what I'm thinking of, where he
Mm-hmm.
said he and his girlfriend, like, as they're kind of falling deeper into this heroin addiction, they're also messing around with the occult. And
Mm-hmm.
he said weird stuff would happen, where the knives and
Yes.
forks
I was wondering if you were going to say that.
were sticking up into the
Yeah.
ceiling and they weren't putting them there.
Yeah. And he's
And,
like, yeah, no, I'm done with this.
yeah, and he talked about how, and he's not that way. He didn't have any prior supernatural
Mm-mm.
beliefs. He didn't believe
Mm-mm.
in God
Nope.
or any of that either.
Nope.
So for that to happen to him and for him to admit it was something, I thought like
Yeah.
something dark really did kind of come
Yeah.
into his
And
life.
there was I did a couple posts, and I mean I love Red Hot Chili Peppers, but clearly they have occult knowledge.
Well, yeah,
Couple I
yeah,
mean, blood sugar sex magic.
exactly.
I mean,
Yeah.
I touch on that, and I touch on the I can't think of the other one right now what it's called, but there's a lot of seems to be sun worship in it, but I have it on
Mm. Did you do so? You do like a cult decodes on some of this
yeah,
music
some of
stuff.
yeah, so, uh-huh.
Mm.
And then so the other one I wanted to bring up was I don't know his name, but Tool's drummer is a Thelemite.
Danny Carey,
Yeah, he's a
right?
Thelemite. He identifies with Aleister Crowley's
I didn't
uh
know that.
yes. He even has like Thelemite what is that the hexagram thing.
Is he into Crowley's version of Thelema or the other breakaway Thelema?
Crowley as far as
Hmm.
I know. And then
Wow.
you got Jimmy Page too.
Of
So
course. Yes, of course. Jimmy Page. If there's any of these guys who were 100% practicing occultists, it was Jimmy Page.
right.
Um, man, that's interesting about Danny Carey. I'd like to hear more about the Frusciante thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just I've always thought that, and I think I told Heidi this one time too on a show, maybe even like that I brought up that Blood Sugar Sex Magic album because
Mm-hmm.
I mean that's a reference to Crowley, right? Or at least the type
Mm-hmm.
of magic that
So
Crowley
I
liked.
mean, right. And there's some other various occult groups that practice sex magic, like the Hermetic Brotherhood of Light. But it does
Hmm.
seem to be that they were.
Oh, I
I'm trying to
remember.
think of
I was
the.
thinking that the sugar was meant for drugs.
Mm,
So
mm-hmm,
what you really see there in that album title is drugs, blood, and sex magic.
mm-hmm,
That's
mm-hmm.
kind of
Yep.
how I felt about it. That's the vibes I got from that.
Yeah. But it talks, in the first verse, it talks about it says, how does it go? I mingle with the gods and divinity, I think. But
Yeah.
it's interesting because in sex magic they often it's they talk about the kundalini and like
Yeah.
when you reach the climax, like doing thought forms as it goes up your chakras or whatever and out your crown chakra and stuff like that. So but yeah, I'll
Coming from
have to
space to teach you of the Pleiades. He's got all
yeah
kinds of lyrics
yeah
that allude to New Age or occult or whatever. He just throws
Mhm.
it in there. And some of it might just be like open, what do they call it? Like where you just open your mind and you speak freely in an
Mhm.
artistic way, like what the Beatniks were doing and all
Mhm.
that. Some of it might be that because I think that he was because I used to be a huge fan. I used to be a totally different person. That's why I read books like The Dirt, Motley Crue, and
Yeah,
all
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I've reformed myself, so to speak. But my favorite author used to be Jack Kerouac.
Oh yeah.
I guess I'd still consider him to be one of my favorite authors. But he
Mhm.
would just sit down and write. What do they call that? Consciousness, stream of consciousness, I think,
Mhm.
or something like that, where you sit down and you just write, and
Right.
it's a form of
Channeling if you
channeling,
yeah. It's
especially
almost
when you
like
take drugs to do it.
how some I know some mediums, they channel through writing, they do the writing. So it
Yes,
almost makes me like think of that.
like Hilga AF or Hilga Af. What's her name? There's a surrealist artist, and
Mhm.
she said, "Do you know who I'm talking about?"
I don't know. I don't think so.
I'll, I'll pull it up real quick. I'll tell
Okay.
you. I want to get her name right. Hildaga? Hilma Af. Sorry,
No, you're fine.
this is terrible. Hilma Af Clint. That's her
Uh-huh.
name. Her middle name is AF, like Af.
Okay.
Hilma Af Clint. She's a Swedish artist and mystic whose paintings are considered among the first major abstract works in Western. Anyways, I don't want to just give you the Wikipedia version here, but basically, when you look into her, she admits she was an open occultist, and she admits that whenever she'd sit down to write or draw, excuse me, to do art, she would let the spirits take over.
Mm-hmm.
So she was always kind of in this battle of my art is not my own because
Right.
they're working through me. I
Right.
just let them draw what they want. And
Mm-hmm.
her art is crazy and beautiful.
Yeah.
But she was open about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of people that probably aren't open about it. Like we talked about, some of the people, whether it's Lovecraft, Geiger, or some of these musicians.
She was such a rock star too. Like, I don't know if that's gonna show, but like this
Oh
lady right
wow.
here,
Okay.
she's just got
Wow.
like this cool, like I know that like what she did was dark, but like
Mm-hmm.
I'm very fascinated by her. She's like
Mm-hmm.
this cool lady, from the
Mm-hmm. Right.
1800s that was doing something nobody else was doing.
And yeah,
And
the
for
height of
her,
spiritualism too.
yeah, yeah. And for her, it's like I don't know that she was like trying to be all deviant and dark. And
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
think maybe this is just something she did since she was a child. It's
Right.
just how it
Mm-hmm.
happened for her.
Yep.
I don't
Yep.
know.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's a good example of how artists can get their message from somewhere else.
Yeah.
I've had it
Yep.
happen to me too. I mean, I was a songwriter for years, and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you sit down and in 2 to 3 minutes later you've written an entire song,
Yeah.
and it's sometimes those are your most compelling songs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for
And I
sure.
didn't have magic books out. I didn't have
Yeah,
candles
no,
lit.
no.
I didn't
Yeah.
approach it that way. It's just, and I don't even know that it came from a dark place. I don't think it did. But we have this ability as
Mm-hmm.
humans to
Right.
open ourselves up and allow stuff to come out. I think it can be used
Mm-hmm.
for good and for bad,
Right.
actually,
Right.
personally.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Hmm.
That would be a good topic to cover one day is, the creativity behind, musicians, artists,
Yeah.
and,
I think
decoding
that's,
some of the stuff that they
I
put
think,
out.
oh, I love that stuff. That is some of
Mm-hmm.
the most fascinating stuff, like where people go and they decode the bands.
Yeah,
and
I'll
the
have to
movies.
send you my links on Ghost and Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Cool, because that's great, because I haven't met anybody yet in this community who's talked about Ghost. I don't even think I've ever brought that story up, which I'm glad I got to tell that story, because there was, and I was like, another thing about that, I was sick the next day after that show.
Oh,
Like bad sick, like
Mhm.
just, I'm like, and then in retrospect, I'm like, did something just like attach itself to me or what, you know?
Yep.
But this has been great.
Yeah, I have
So
had a blast. It was a great
me
episode.
too.
Great conversation.
Yeah, this is great. We'll have you back to do that part 2.
Yes.
And yeah, tell everyone where they can find you.
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram at Stygian Charters. There's an underscore between Stygian Charters, but it's STYGIAN underscore Charters, CHARTERS. And you can also find me on X under Stygian Charters, no underscore in that. You will find my better posts on Instagram because unfortunately X likes to limit your characters, your pictures, your video times. And I can normally get all my research into such a minimal restriction. But yeah, you can find me on there. And then my podcast is on all major podcast platforms, Apple, Spotify, Podcast Addict, any of those. So
Great. I'll leave some links in the description for her below. And as always, break the mold, conquer the realm, and thanks for listening.